All right. So this is the very first conversation that I'm doing on this channel on the question of movement practice. What does it mean to have a movement practice? How do you build a movement practice? And this is the first one, so I'm not going to try to say more than that about the overall theme of our discussion, but I want to introduce Andrew Gibbons, who's here with me. And really excited to have Andrew. It was kind of a logical choice to start with you, Andrew, just because, as we were joking about before, we tend to be pretty good at having long conversations already.
Yeah.
But just for the audience, I'll say that Andrew and I are both Feldenkrais practitioners. And while I think we'll talk about the Feldenkrais method, I don't think trying to explain Feldenkrais is the center of what I want to ask you about, Andrew, but I think something will come out about that as we go on, but I'd rather talk from a broader frame. Mm-hmm. But in any case, that's obviously how we know each other. I believe I first became aware of you in either 2014 or 15, when it's kind of a friend thing. I began to hear some audio recordings of your teaching. We hadn't met, and found what you had to offer very valuable at that point in time. I remember writing to you about some of the recordings. And then I think it was probably in New York in 2016 when we were both participating in a training program there. You were actually part of the staff of the program. I was one of the students, where we first met in person. We've run into each other many times since then. Obviously, we're in the same field. But I thought maybe it'd be fun to start from another point of connection we have, which is we're both in the world of music. We've both come from musical backgrounds, and yet very distinct ones. I think to paint with a really broad brush, we could say that I've been, and I'm not so much active as a musician now, but for many years, I was involved in experimental and improvisational music, which I know you love because you're often talking in your classes about people like Art Tatum or other of the great jazz pianists. You yourself are a pianist, and yet you were, and I believe still are, very much in the world of classical music. And so there's a little bit of a, well, there's two broad categories in music in terms of learning music, performing music, that relate to these two worlds, right? The world of playing music that's been written on a page, and there really is a correct way to play Beethoven. I mean, two people can play the same Beethoven and it sounds very different, but if you didn't hit the F sharp when he wrote the F sharp,
right, you can play wrong notes in Beethoven.
That was wrong. Okay, do it over, start again. In the world of improvisation, it's a little more, people can enjoy a particular musician's improvisation or not enjoy it, but you can't say, well, you just played a wrong note. And they're two very different approaches. And I'll just say for myself, you know, I never mastered the world of notated music. I never got to the point where you could put any music in front of me and, you know, I would just produce it. But I knew a lot of people like that. And of course they would want to rehearse it more to make it sound crisp, but they could play, they could perform. I was with people in situations where they were sight reading during the performance, maybe for the first time. Those were some of the crazy situations I found myself in. Right. And so I didn't have access to that skill, which is a real valuable skill. On the other hand of things, I think it's kind of a, it's kind of a common phenomenon. You go into a school of classical music and you ask, say you just ask anyone there, can you please improvise something? And at least some of the people will be freaked out by that, be like, no, I don't improvise. So I just thought I would kind of open up this frame, but then just remind people, we're here to talk about movement. So, and all references and comparisons to music are welcome here. But how would you see the role of both a kind of more structured approach to a movement practice, where maybe there's a set of exercises, I'm trying to do 10 of these, versus, geez, I wonder what I can do with this spine of mine, or something like that. How do you see the value in the world of movement, of structure?
Well, there's the important thing in the beginning, of course, is just to know where you want to go, right? There are many people that are just interested in, they're more in their body, or they like to dance, or they like to play sports, they like to do things that are more ballistic or have more exertion. So they like stuff that involves movement. There are people who are also, they don't want to do that kind of stuff. They're much more drawn to books, and I'm not saying that obviously you can't have both of those things in your life, but the word movement practice, I think we should try to define a little more because it's one of those terms like sports, it's a big umbrella term, and it's a big world. So there can be a lot of different approaches. Something like capoeira or certain kinds of martial arts that are really high velocity and gymnastic and acrobatic, compared to I don't know, some more esoteric breathing tactics in yoga that might be much, if you were to watch someone in that practice, you wouldn't be seeing much going on, because they'd be focusing on the breath in a certain way. So I think for a lot of people, though, who are now with the internet, are able to see what a wide variety of approaches that there are out there. Of course, for the people who are curious, they start to get a little curious, and they want to go find out what the different practices are for. And of course, some people are looking simply for a way to enjoy themselves for an hour. They're going to a yoga class for the supposed health benefits, and they like the discipline or the way that the asanas are taught, or whatever, and that makes them feel good. Some people are going to be more intense, and they're going to find out that they discover something about themselves within the practice that opens up some new possibility for them, and they're going to go further, or they're going to go deeper. They're going to become more serious. They're going to make it more of not a once a week class that they go to. They start going twice a week, or they start to really practice at home on their own time. These are personal discoveries that people start to make, and of course, they're finding out about themselves through the movement practice, and that's good. That's healthy. That's kind of what I think they're for in a certain way. Of course, other things are really about physical fitness. People are going to the gym as that's their movement practice, or they're lifting weights, or whatever their physical fitness practice is. They're doing it for a very set and prescribed reason. They want to lose weight. They want to be able to bench this much weight, or they feel weak and they don't want to feel weak anymore, so they're going to strengthen or whatever. So everybody is trying to figure out what they want along the way. Yes, it's not like everybody knows exactly what they want when they get into these practices.
Right. So if I could jump in just for a second, I'm glad that you slowed us down a little on that phrase, movement practice, because that is in fact kind of the heart of what I'm hoping we'll talk about, and the other people I'm planning to invite in here. And I think you did a great job of getting us started, because of course we could have all kinds of motivations for practicing movement, and who's to say which one is more valid? I mean, the weightlifter, or the person losing weight, or the person who's wanting to provide a nice environment for their kids in the park on a weekend. These are all completely valid, but it would seem that is one piece right there, is to know what you're doing, right? Or it could be, I mean, I suppose as you mentioned, it could be a movement practice to just say, well, I like yoga, and I go to class every week, and then when class is over, I go do other things. In terms though of what I guess I'm really,
there are usually phases that people are in.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Right. There's different stages. I mean, if I look at my own life, I can trace back to around 10 years ago when I kind of thought, yes, movement, that's the thing. That's the thing. And, you know, it is what I do now. But then later I thought back and I was like, man, when I was a teenager, I was never more alive than I was during the soccer games. That was aliveness, but I didn't recognize it back then. I didn't, you know, even I would have said I love soccer or I love, you know, but I didn't yet recognize what I was doing in such a way that, oh, let me be intentional about this. Let me be deliberate. In terms of, you know, what I'm hoping that people would come to this channel to watch a conversation like this for, I'll just put out a phrase that I've sort of come to repeat. You know how we think about things for a long time and then finally it coalesces into a phrase, and it's a phrase that you have to unpack. But for me, I talk to clients and people I'm working with about something that I would define as a sustainable and meaningful personal growth practice. So each one of those words, you know, you could say a lot, but just quickly, sustainable means, you know, I can fit it into my schedule. First of all, is a very simple. Meaningful is it does something for me that I want. So if I want to lose weight, I am losing weight through this practice or whatever my goal is.
Right.
Personal in so much as I might begin by taking that yoga class, but then I start noticing what things the teacher does that are most valuable to me. And I start to hone, I stop just being a recipient of what the teacher gives me. Although I may continue to go to class, I may continue to get a lot of value from the teacher. I start to flavor things myself a little, you know, and shape things. And as you pointed out, there's just the internet. I mean, there is endless choice. And so I think it's almost a necessity for us to begin to do a little work on our own, whether or not we're, you know, you and I are basically in the world of, this is our income, we're movement professionals, and maybe everyone watching this will be a movement professional, but they may well be someone who knows that they have some kind of practice that's about making their life better. And that's really the last part of it. It's a growth practice. It's for me to grow. It's for me to grow into a better version of myself, however I define that. And then practice, in my mind, it kind of comes back to the thing about the schedule. But it's whether it's once a week or whether it's daily, it is about showing up. In other words, it's sometimes showing up when I don't feel like it. I'd rather not go running, but I'm going to run.
I would say also the line between do you have a movement practice or not? If you're just attending a live class every week, you're getting close, maybe, or that may be the door. But I think it's really when you're spending your own private time. Or your own disposable income working privately with a teacher to really get somewhere, you know, you want to get better at whatever discipline it is, then you actually have a practice. You know, the purpose of a practice is not simply it can be used just for enjoyment. Like I go to a square dancing class and that's, you know, maybe, you know, I made that up. I do like to square dance every summer, but, you know, but it's different if you're practicing out in your backyard by yourself, right? It's different if you're starting to choreograph square dance, or, you know, when you're on vacation, you do yoga because of the way it makes you feel, because you like it, because it's part of your routine. It's nutritious for your life. It's not merely, Thursdays is yoga night and I see my friends there, and that's all good too. Of course, there are a lot of, again, it's a big world, right? Some people are coming out of a fairly superficial desire, or they're just getting their feet wet. I don't mean superficial to sound negative, but they're in the early stage of trying out different things. And of course, part of what they're looking for is this practice, is it interesting to me? Is it rich enough? Or is it simple enough? Is it safe? And is it too advanced for where I am? Is the teacher like kind of welcoming and really holds the community of the room together nicely, or holds, if there's discussions, is the discussion at a level at which I enjoy, or is it too highfalutin, or it's too solid? I don't need to know about the you know, whatever it is, but the people are navigating all the time. And often in later stages, they figure out, I like this guy, I like this teacher, I like this class, and then they stop navigating because they just say, I'm going to go to this person's class, and they just set it in their framework of their schedule or their life until something else happens, right? Until something really good happens, or maybe they get hurt because the class was too advanced that week, and then they back off, and they're, it's a this, but yeah, I think when you have a movement practice, it means you're spending your own time looking into these things. Like, you found it useful enough, or you've spent enough time at the early stages that you're starting to actually take it into something deeper.
So when we talk about, yeah, I think that's a logical, probably, I mean, if we're trying to talk about every kind of movement practice, every kind of person, we have to be a little general. But I think it's fair to say that for many of us, that is kind of a first stage, even if it's, we can, argue about where's the line where it's really practice. But for sure, encountering a teacher or even just a friend saying, hey, like I remember the point in time where I didn't know what yoga was, but I'd heard about it. And then I decided to go to my first class, right? I don't think I had a practice then, but that was a step. But maybe at this point, it'll make a little more sense to come back to the first question I asked, which was improvisation versus, let's call it, structure, maybe. And right. In terms of, let's say I've just discovered yoga, or I've just discovered the Feldenkrais method, or a martial art, or a particular sport that I want to get good at, I want to join the league. And now, and let's say I've found my teacher too, and here I go to class. But then I do kind of understand at a certain point, well, that one thing I learned in class when I went to play a game on the weekend, that really helped me. And that other stuff, not so much. And so now I'm at the stage where maybe I am trying to define a little beyond the teacher told me X, Y, Z. And here's the place that, in my experience, and I'd love to hear if you have, particular stories around this, but a lot of the people that come to me to come to my class or to work with me privately, it's often because of pain, or it's because they want to improve at a skill of some kind. But we might say that they're mainly at the stage that for one reason or another, they heard about me, and I'm currently playing the role of potentially the solution to this problem, right? So it's like, hey, Seth, what do I do? Oh, you say your class is on Mondays. Okay, I'll show up. But at a certain point, there's often a time where I get into this kind of paradoxical conversation where I'm almost insisting that people shouldn't do something just because I told them. And it's kind of like, what do you mean? Aren't you the movement teacher? I mean, what am I paying you for? And yet there's a way that I think, so in terms of improvisation or structure, if I go to movement class, the simplest thing to do is what the teacher said, because after all, that's the teacher. Improvisation might be, you told me to, you told me to bend to the side, but you didn't say if I could bend my knees, but man, it feels good when I bend my knees and do that. And I'm not actually sure if I'm doing what I'm supposed to now, but I am discovering a sensation I like in my ribs. So what do I do with that? Because again, I think there are those people, if we use the music analogy, who are like, I don't think I'm supposed to improvise. And yet I think, so for me, in any case, just talk about my own view, I think there is a real value in improvisation in your movement practice in this sense, or maybe we just call it breaking the rules or going off script. And at the same time, because of my own background, maybe in music, I've also learned in recent years, sometimes just being freeform and creative and moving in every possible way. Also, there's a limit to what you can do with that. Sometimes the teacher said something for a very good reason. But then I guess, well, I'll stop there. There's another thing of like, why did the teacher say that, and how do we figure that out? And that's a discussion with the teacher. But maybe just in terms of,
no, I get.
You often talk about this in your classes.
How does the student deal with that? Sorry, finish your sentence. There's something froze there for a minute, and so
yeah, Zoom. But in your classes, just you've often delivered the let's say the instructions of the movements that are going to be taking place during the hour when people come to your class, and yet you often sprinkle in commentary about people's response to the instructions, or their response to you, or the way they're relating to themselves in the class, which seems to me that there is something really central to what a movement practice is that you're talking about there.
Well, it's a little tricky because all students, all people that come to classes, whatever, everybody has a navigation problem. They just don't know that they have one yet. And part of this is you got to try it to see if you like it. And then if you like it, you do some more, and then you see where it leads. But when we pull back, everybody is coming out of some culture. Some people are coming out of a growing up in a neighborhood or a house that was very rough and tumble, where physical exertion was just like, it was, not only was it part of your day, it was almost like a currency. You had to show that you were tough, or whatever. You could wrestle this guy next week, or whatever it was. Some people are coming out of physical cultures where if you played soccer on the streets with a lot of kids and you were playing lots and lots of pickup games, okay, if you're doing a lot of unstructured time like that with other kids, you're going to figure out who's good right away, right? And you're going to figure out that the person who's good is not only probably has some talent and some gifts, but they also work at it too. Like those two things usually go together, right? And then you're going to see, oh, that guy's always doing these ball juggling routines and ball handling. I always see him working on that. So you can grow up in that kind of a culture where you're already learning to appreciate the relationship between practice and skill development. So that's just to say that, and some people don't grow up in that at all, and then they want to come to a Feldenkrais class or yoga class or whatever, and they are dealing with the first, they're dealing with maybe a magnified caliber of attention on their body, or they're dealing with certain movement instructions to be in this position or that position. They're dealing with that for the first time, and sometimes what they find is, well, they let their body go for a couple of years, and they're not really enjoying the experience of being in this position or examining this movement pattern or whatever it is. It's very, very common. All instructional situations have this. This is just part of what's built into them. The question is really whether you're working with a teacher that understands that that's the nature of that situation. Are you at a kind of a boot camp experience where it's just like you're kind of paying for a really jacked up exertion experience, and you kind of want the instructor to show no mercy? Like you've kind of been anticipating this, I want to push myself experience. Okay, well then there are people that are positively oriented to that, and maybe the instructor does a great job, and you get the great cardiovascular benefit or whatever of really pushing yourself and doing a lot of cardio that way. That can, of course, go off the rails, because if you don't really know how to use your body very well, that kind of environment can lead to injury, of course. And so part of my thing, when you're referring to just the way I tend to talk with students in the awareness through movement classes that I teach, is part of the way I see at least the Feldenkrais practice is you are really trying to learn to qualify your own experience. And that project gets polluted if whenever you hear a movement instruction, you just respond kind of robotically or compulsively. Like that's not the point of the class, right? I'm sorry, say that again.
You just said that you want to qualify your experience. Can you just define what you mean by that a little?
Yeah, well, if you were a piano teacher, I in the past I've taught piano and whatnot, you have an experience of working with some people really improve and some people don't, and some students are very talented, and some people just come to their piano lesson every week and you can tell they don't practice. They have no relationship to practice. That's why I was referring to earlier, like the definition of really having a movement practice means you really are carving out private time to work on this stuff away from the class, away from the teacher. Because in the musical context that I certainly come from, nobody is pretending that they're going to get better each week and not practice on their own. That does not tend to happen. And maybe that's because of the level of the material or the difficulty of certain kinds of music, whatever. But that is something that you run up against pretty much right away. The other thing that's problematic, though, is in any kind of situation where it's instructional, where you're there to learn something, you're trying to acquire a particular skill in a particular context. It's being delivered through a particular teacher or a particular, tradition or culture or whatever. There is a dangerous, I don't know if it's dangerous, but there's an assumption hiding all the time, which is if I just do what they tell me, I must be acquiring the skill. And that is, that's really questionable in my opinion.
So you've often distilled this whole conversation. Again, I'm just thinking of things that I've been in your class and I've heard you say, which is, for example, let me give you a concrete example and maybe.
You're going to quote me back.
No, I won't quote you. I promise. Well, actually,
you're going to pull up some notes. I
am going to quote you because I'm sure you've said this, but I don't have it written down anywhere. But is it possible, Andrew, that you may have said at some point in a class, please bend your knees and stand your feet?
Oh yeah.
Right. And I'm sure you don't have to be a Feldenkrais person to have given such an instruction, relying on the back, bend their knees and stand their feet. But I've been in classes where you might give that instruction and then students are doing something. And then your next comment will be what you saw people do in response to what you just said. Mm-hmm. Or it might be, please place your hand on top of your head. But you often say, the point is there's a moment in between you ask me to stand my feet or put my hand on top of my head. There's a moment before I do it when I've just heard what you said and before I enact or fulfill the instruction or whatever you want to say.
Right.
But you've pointed at that moment many times. What's going on in that moment?
It's not an attempt. It's not always an attempt on my part anyway, to sort of, give a gotcha to the students like, haha, I see you being compulsive. Although that is often going on for sure. And again, part of this is not, this works well when the students have known me for a little bit, right? When they become familiar with me and they learn they can trust me that I'm not out there to like,
right.
Berate,
this is a striking thing because you do this and a lot of people haven't run into that before. They're like,
right,
he told me to put my hand on top of my head. I did it. So why aren't we moving on? Like, why are we still talking about, like, isn't that in the history that's already passed, And
well, there's certainly, I've been teaching awareness through movement for 20 years now. So, hopefully I will continue to get better and refine, but I kind of know what I've seen at this point. I have enough of a variety of experience that I know when people in the room, they become inattentive to what they're doing. I know what it looks like when people are actually authentically attentive to their own experience in the movement, and they've figured out how to move at a relatively slow pace so they can pay attention to the detail that's really being brought into the foreground of the conversation of the lesson. And then, of course, because you then do the next thing, or you pause and rest, and then you start the next variation or whatever it might be, you need to tell them what's to do next. The lesson is being led by a teacher. And there are, of course, a variety of ways to deal with this. We're just talking about one particular penchant maybe I have sometimes. But there's a way in which the student needs to gradually take on the responsibility of seeing that this quality of attention hopefully is something that they can really bring into more than just some particular highlighted moment that the teacher specifically highlights for them, right? Like that movement quality that they're there to acquire, that maybe for a brief moment they actually do. They actually embody a certain lightness, a certain smoothness, a certain quality of support or strength or whatever it is. They have that, and then the teacher is hopefully, you know, paying attention in the room, and to see that quality then chucked out the window just because the teacher said, okay, and now please bend your knees and stand your feet, and then they just do something that's rather obedient looking, or like, that's a little disturbing, right? I'm just speaking personally. Like, I can see that. I don't like it. Now there are times at which I'm going to bring that up and bring that to their attention, hopefully in a skillful way. But I'm certainly aware that a certain quality of experience has been broken at that point.
Maybe at this point, it's worth just saying a couple of words, which I kind of declined to say at the beginning about the Feldenkrais method, because there may well be people watching who aren't so familiar. But you mentioned moving slowly. And I mean, that's the thing that tends to hit anyone over the head when they walk into their first Feldenkrais class. They say, well, this is really slow. And,
right.
You know, so even what are we talking about? A teacher who gives an instruction and then has a conversation about how people respond to the instruction. I mean, how does the class ever even get anywhere? But the point is, you know, it seems that there's something in the quality, and another key word you used was attention. And so the tempo of the movement, the quality of the movement, the attention, or how we use our attention. In other words, yes, put my hand on top of my head, but what was I paying attention to? Was it my hand? Was it fulfilling the instructions, you know, so that I can be a good student? Was it, you know, something that maybe you wouldn't think, like, oh, did I just shift my weight on my pelvis when I did that? So these are certainly things that we could say more broadly about the kind of thing you would find in a Feldenkrais classroom that may or may not be your classroom or my classroom. And yet I do highlight this because even within the Feldenkrais world, I think you've taken a particular, you know, you've taken a particular interest in this. I mentioned finding your recordings originally before we met. And I remember at a certain point writing you an email where I thanked you for your explanation of what I called the psychology of slowing down. Because slowing down, you know, which again, it's what you're going to be asked to do if you show up to an awareness through movement class. For a lot of people, they find out, well, I thought I was slowing down, and then the teacher told me to slow down again, and then they still, you know, so there's this,
right.
There can be a real frustration for people about this.
Well, there's a reason why people get frustrated. And that's because they're not explained, they don't have a reason for the value of slowing down. Like, let me paint a picture for you, right? You go to a whatever it is, you go to a piano lesson, and the teacher is just like, and now I want you to put your hands on the keys, and I want you to just gently, and they don't explain to you what, you know, they don't give a context for what are we going to do and why, and here's what I want you to look for. They just behave this way.
Yeah,
it would be a little weird. I mean, for me, maybe I'd just be kind of like, it would put me off of having more rapport with the teacher, maybe. And so for me, you know, we're teaching adults, in my experience, not all adults, but adults are not children. They would like to know what the value is of something, sometimes before they go to do it. Some of that is being a good salesman, perhaps, you know, explaining the value of what we're about to do. But it also helps them give a reason for paying attention with this level of attention. You know, there are people out there who, if they don't understand the value, if they're not explained what the opportunity that emerges when you slow down, and there's a huge opportunity, but it needs to be explained, right? It needs to be explained clearly. If they don't get that explanation, or they don't really, there's no intellectual framework, there's just no context for it, there are potentially a couple of ways that people fall out or reject the opportunity. And one of them is that they get bored, right? there's not enough going on. They don't know really what to do with their attention. They've never slowed things down in that way. And so they're bored. They need more information or more detail. Or two, sometimes when they slow down, they don't really like what they feel. Some people, if you have them slow down, what emerges is, God, when I move my arm that slowly, I'm aware of how, gunked up my neck is or my shoulder is. And the fact that we're going slow is not solving any problems for me. In fact, it's rubbing my nose, perhaps, in my own experience, and I don't know how to deal with that. So those are not, it's not always what happens. I'm just aware, I've again, my years of experience, whatever they're worth, I'm aware of some varieties of the ways that students will fall out of the opportunity that can be presented in the lesson. And I'm all about them getting the value that's there,
And so, yeah, to get the value, you've taught in the past year, you recently taught a whole series about being in the lunge position. In other words, the person has one knee on the ground and they have the sole of one foot on the ground, which is a position that maybe a number of athletes are very familiar and comfortable with, but maybe for the general public, a lot of people just notice how unstable they are when they get in that position. You've also taught classes just around, I guess we could just say posture, to be simple about it, to be comfortably upright. You had a class that actually I wanted to ask you about this, and maybe we can wrap these together. You taught a very interesting class in the past year that involved an egg. And maybe it actually is good. Maybe you could tell a little bit about that class, but because people might be wondering, well, why do I go to this class where this guy talks about how I respond to instructions anyway? Like, what are the benefits? I mean, I'll personally, attest that I've learned all kinds of things. I think my ability to find the very bottom of my hip joints has really benefited from what you've taught me over the last couple of years, as one example. But you're teaching movement.
And the muscles that actually move them.
Right, the muscles that move them. But the muscles that move them, you didn't just tell me to contract them. You told me to pay attention to them. You told me to notice the sensations. You told me to notice what it feels like when I use them inefficiently. That's another thing that,
this is another problem that I think students and teachers share this problem, which is that the language is usually, it's not sufficient. Like, if you tell someone and then open your hip joint or whatever, you may think you know what you said. Half the room may go, or they may be opening it and it doesn't feel so good. To me, the opportunity that's available in awareness through movement, as opposed to just my soccer coach saying, okay, let's do hip stretches or whatever. To me, the opportunity is there's a bunch of really important details that are part of the composition of opening the hip or lifting the leg and flexing the hip or whatever. There's a bunch of really important details that, in my limited experience, not a lot of people take the time to show you. The kind of people that will take the time to show you maybe are a good physical therapist. Like, if you have an injury, right? You torn the labrum on something and then you can't walk, or you're really limping badly. Like, okay, life has just stopped you and your ignorance and your whatever progress you were making. Life is just going to tell you, you're getting nothing else until you figure this out. And it makes you learn about something that was there all the time, but you just took for granted. Everybody takes their body for granted. Very few people are really, except if it's their work, very few people are really using their movement practice to understand more specifically, how does this thing work? Although you can get that experience without the academic knowledge of the musculature and the skeleton and the nerves and all that kind of stuff. You can develop skill. I mean, it's not like when I played, a concerto on the piano, it's not like I learned all the muscles in my fingers. That was not the approach
Well, that's a funny example, though, because musicians, you've taught. It's the Marlborough Music Festival that you've taught at.
Oh, you froze a little bit. Are you still there? Okay.
Yeah, this is happening.
You just froze. Repeat the question.
We'll see if this comes through on the recording. The question was, because you were just talking about people who, movement teachers maybe, or athletes who movement is what they do. And so they don't take it so much for granted as others. But then you were talking about playing music. And the funny thing is musicians often don't consider themselves as people who what they do is movement, but it's entirely movement. I mean, you have to depress the keys on the piano. You have to sit in some kind of posture. You have to draw the string over or draw the bow over the strings of the violin. So it's all movement. And yet many musicians, and I mentioned the Marlborough Music Festival where you've taught. Right. I've heard some of your stories of musicians who seem to almost think that the music is unrelated to their body, or not unrelated, but it's almost striking how little they've studied movement. They've framed things in terms of music, even though it's the movement of the body that's going to produce the music.
Well, I mean, it really depends on the person. Yes, I mean, most musicians are not, learning the violin by learning about the deltoid. That's just, I mean, there might be a school out there that does that. I don't know, but the thing is, again, you're in a particular culture when you're learning an instrument. You're in a particular context, and in those situations where you're learning to play violin, it's not an easy instrument to pick up and start to play it. The first tier obstacles are rather high. The piano's first tier obstacles are extremely low. You touch the key, the sound comes out. If the piano tuner was there and the piano's in tune, sounds like a piano key. But a violin, there's the first obstacle. You're having to learn how to play in tune, which it has enormous demands on the person beginning that. But again, you're with a violin teacher. You're not working with an anatomy teacher, or, I mean, you might be doing some ancillary things to help, but most of it is in a musical context. And there is so much to learn and stabilize about that to get good at the thing that you apparently want to get good at. Again, what often happens is people don't get to the body, or they don't learn about what the muscles are in the arm that move the arm until they've been injured, right? An injury or pain or, whatever, that is usually the moment that confronts you with what you don't understand. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily mean there people get injured and then they don't go to a medical doctor or a PT or somebody else. They try, something else. They try to do yoga. They do a self treatment regime or whatever. But the thing about learning about your body is there are some basic things to learn that we all take for granted. And the funny thing is when you learn about them, if it's learned well, if it's taught well, and it's in a realistic context, it can be helpful to know about that stuff,
So we're bouncing around a lot of places, but let's take this last case. I'm a musician and I've injured my shoulder, and I might go to the PT, I might not. I might go to the yoga class, I might do a number of things. But as you say, I even if I go to see various professionals or take various classes, I signed up. I'm still creating, in a sense, my curriculum, because I decide what I do from the morning from the moment I wake up in the morning to the end of the day. What do you think might be the difference in terms of what we're defining here as a movement practice between that musician who actually a year later no longer has the shoulder problem and the one that still does? Whether they went to this class or that class or saw that person, how did the musician who actually figured out how to be comfortable in their shoulder when they play music, what do you think they did in that, say, year of time of recovery? What did they do right?
I mean, obviously we're talking about a hypothetical person,
of
so
course.
I don't want my answer to feel like it applies to everybody. We'll just stay hypothetical.
Can you just give a formula that'll work for everyone, Andrew?
Yeah, let me just give a prescription for all shoulder injuries, right? I think what happens when it goes really well is that a person becomes actually interested in their problem. That is the first step, to actually be, I don't mean just aware of their problem, because that's easy. Pain will let you know, and hey, you're aware of your problem. But they're actually interested. In other words, their curiosity, they don't have a deficit of curiosity. That's very important, because again, it's your body. And even if you end up getting surgery by a fantastic surgeon who does just fantastic job, and you work with a rehab specialist who's just great at their job, and you do a good job, even after that, you are still the one that is going to have to keep taking responsibility for whether this thing erodes and gets worse. And that's the wake-up call, is that the maintenance functions they're really in your ballpark. That's your job, is to take care of the maintenance functions. If you can't take care of your maintenance functions, your progress functions are going to fall apart in a hurry. And that's what a lot of musicians who, I mean, let's assume we're talking about a musician who gets injured because of the way they play, not because they, played softball one day and a line drive hit them in the arm, and
So it's a behavioral issue. In other words, it's the thing that I do is I play music. I'm going to do it tomorrow and the next day and next week. Yes. But at a certain point, I might discover I have to, from now on, do it differently.
Right. And it's very common for people, when they have an injury under those circumstances, it doesn't wake up their curiosity all the time. Some of those people, they just want it to go away, the same way that a non-musician would be like, God, this is really inconvenient. I can't, get in the car and pull the seatbelt over without that pain or whatever. And then, of course, sometimes the first steps are, I need to talk to somebody in that profession who can help me. I want to get a prescription. What should I do? Should I do stretches? They just want a prescription. So I do that and it goes away. Okay. That may work. You have to get pretty lucky for that little exchange to work. Sometimes it will, but in a lot of cases, it doesn't. And it doesn't because there's a lot more going on than you're willing to acknowledge. You may have gotten injured not because you just did something egregious. You may have something that took 10 years to get to this point, and it's finally gone. That could be the conditions under which this thing has happened, and you don't really know that, right? So you're struggling to orient in your experience. Where am I? Is this something that I've built over the last 10 years? Is it because I just picked up one of the harder pieces in the repertoire, and I've been really woodshedding 5 hours a day, whereas I usually only practice 2.5 hours a day, but I got this big concert coming up, and the intensity with which you ramped up your schedule, that could be part of it. Again, most of this is really, you're having to orient very clearly in your life. And not everybody is really like that. Including musicians. Some are fantastic, and others are just like anybody else. They ignore it until it gets worse, and then they rest up for 2 days, and then they think it's better, and then they ignore it, and it gets even worse on the next round, and it comes back. That's also on.
So this phrase I used before, which was when I heard some of your teaching early on, and I talked to you about the psychology of slowing down. We can imagine, and I think it's almost cliche among Feldenkrais practitioners, that we often find those people who have quote unquote tried everything else, and then they come to an awareness through movement class or a functional integration session, which is when we're working one-on-one, doing the hands-on application of Feldenkrais. And so if we imagine that person, whether it's a musician or any person, but the person who's had a long-standing issue, and they may well have been through that stage of, well, I did the exercises I was told to do, and it still doesn't work. Then I tried yoga, and it was great until I injured myself in that one class when I stretched. And then, so at least in my case, I've heard these stories, right? When I just ask the person the sort of initial, so why have you come? There's a whole narrative. And my take on things is like, in that moment that we were talking about, bend your knees and stand your feet, that whole narrative is there, right? So that obviously personalities are of every stripe that come into the class, but there is a piece of, for some people, it's like, okay, bend my knees and stand my feet, but is this gonna make me feel better? That could be a thought. Or like, bend my knees and stand my feet. Oh, good, this is gonna solve, because I'm actually pretty sure that Andrew is the guy who's gonna fix my problem once and for all. So I'm ready to go, let's do it. You know, and I mean, that's really says nothing about like the angle of the knee or where you place the feet on the floor, but there's a kind of there's an emotional flow that's going on from the beginning to the end of a class. You know, you asked me to do that movement and something just changed in my shoulder, and wow, maybe I don't have to be in agony for the next year. And then like 2 minutes later, I overdo something. Oh shit. Oh, I knew this wasn't going to help anyway. You know, like I'm really kind of playing it up here, but I mean, there is, and I've experienced it for myself, just that there's a way that I'm talking to myself throughout the class, right? Like I'm talking to myself all day long. So I come to class, my teacher asks me to try this, or maybe it's a class where not so common in the world of Feldenkrais, although not entirely absent, but maybe I watched the teacher do something and then I tried to imitate the teacher, because that's often the way that movement is taught. And then in the very next moment, I have a judgment of what the teacher did versus what I just did. And I have a feeling like, you know, I give myself a grade, and then that grade is kind of like stamped on me for the rest of the class, unless I can sort of like get a better grade on one of the other movements. Or
well, that's, I mean, again, the people are, of course, people are they're in a story of their lives all the time, right? We all are. And one of the main questions is how you interpret that story for yourself. And, you know, when you go to a class, are you throwing yourself on the mercy of that, you know, class, or like, oh, I hope this fixes me? Like, it's probably not a good orientation to be in. Or are you just suspicious of every experience you have, or I'll try this class, but it's you know, you're really, you know, skeptical or cynical. I mean, you know,
here's
people have all kinds of stuff going on.
You told me to do XYZ, but the last movement class I went to, the teacher said something different. That's another one.
Right. Well, that's welcome to life. You know, your style is always being compared to a long chain of other experiences that they've had, right? So, I mean,
we're joking, but you know, when I sometimes try to tell the story of how did I get here, the short version goes something like this. 10 years ago, my life was kind of a mess, right? There was a lot of, let's call it existential questions that were very unresolved, and I had no idea how to resolve them. And I had a thought that seemed like a little insight, and I thought, well, maybe I can improve my health. I started running, later did yoga, later I found Feldenkrais, but it was almost out of exasperation with, you know, I don't know about the career thing. I don't know about the interpersonal relationships. I don't know about, you know, my emotional life. I don't know how to figure out any of that. I haven't got the first clue, but I do feel a little better after go running. And slowly, you know, but surely, I've come to a place, and maybe this is just the classic kind of discussion about body and mind and are they separate? But I mean, for me, they're resoundingly not separate. And at this point in my own, you know, development, my own personal practice, it's not that I have to analyze every thought that I have while I practice movement, but it seems like if I think that I can compartmentalize my emotional life from what I'm doing in the movement class, or you know, it's as you say, it is life all the time. Even though I'm in movement class, it's still life, and I think that we actually fail to acknowledge that at our peril, as obvious as it may seem.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are looking when they're shopping around for movement practices. Not that that's a a formal behavior, like I'm going shopping for, but people do, people try different stuff, maybe maybe they're shopping for something to help them with their problem, right? Their hip is a problem, or their feet, or they have a friend that got really fit doing X, and so they want to try to do X to get fit too. There's just so many people are coming in so many valences into these experiences, and most people, of course, are wanting at some level to feel like it helps them make sense of things. I don't think most people are thinking, I'm looking for something to discombobulate me, right? Or I'm looking for something to really disorient me. I mean, most people are looking for some version of a positive experience. This is going to help me with my health, or my my state of mind, or whatever it is. But my question always is, okay, and what else would you? Is there something more specific, right? Because getting towards the more specific questions of a good match between what the person actually wants, which they may not tell you right up front. And again, there's the elephant in the room also is, are they trying to get that from a group class? Well, that's most of that is on them, right? If you know specifically what you need, working privately with someone is obviously it can be a much quicker, or certainly a more direct, and more, if you're working with somebody who's good, they can really shape the experience to benefit you and nobody else in the room. Obviously, you're not one of many. And so that becomes an important just consideration of how are you planning to use this experience? If we're talking about having a movement practice where it's really going to be something that informs your life, that it's something that becomes part of your vocabulary, you can rely on it. Like in my own movement practice, like one of the ways that I use my own movement practice is to get myself out of jams. I have been injured several times in my life, not so bad that I had to go to the hospital, but took a spill on the ice kind of thing. Slipped and braced with my hand and hurt my shoulder, and got it x-rayed, and nothing was broken, but I really, dinged some ligaments, and, that didn't go away right away. That didn't go away even after the prescribed number of physical therapy sessions that my insurance would allow, or, maybe the other injury, I didn't even have health insurance at that particular point in my life. So, one of the very practical ways that I try to apply what I get from my movement practices is I try to keep myself from getting worse, right? I am not a thrill-seeking personality. My particular performative area where I really care about a high level of something is at the piano. That's just where, I don't make my living doing that, but that's where I like to see, that's another arena where I like to see what's the cash value of what I understand now about my hip joints, or about my shoulders. Like, can I make better sense of how I'm practicing this particular piece of music? Well, like that's definitely an arena where I apply stuff to, for sure.
Yeah, it seems like what you're saying too is, like, if you injured your hip or your shoulder, of course, anyone would want the pain and discomfort to go away. But it's when you're sitting at the piano that you realize the value of your movement practice, because what happens for you when you really feel deeply connected at the piano and you go to that place, which you can only get in that place. And so, or the person who comes and says, can you help me? I just, every morning I wake up and the right side of my neck is just full of knives. But the question is often like, okay, so if we somehow take those knives out of the right side of your neck, then what are you going to do with your life then?
Mm-hmm. There's a large percentage of people that are just looking to remove a negative experience from their life. Nothing wrong with that. I've had that experience many times. I don't want to climb Everest. I just want my ankle to feel, to just glide a little more smoothly, and so I can go for a run. And my kids are going to the park, and I want to go and run with them. Like, it's that level of, that's the cash value for me. Now, I was, at one point when I was younger, I was very lucky in that I was injured quite early. Lucky in the sense I've had enough time to really figure it out. But that's another arena where I obviously want to keep myself in shape so that, again, the most important thing for me is I want to know whether what I'm doing in the activities that I love, am I tearing myself down or am I actually building myself up? That's a very difficult question. When I first moved, we moved to Long Island 4 years ago. New house, new school. I was like, I'm going to join a gym. I got to lose some weight. I'm going to join. There's a local gym. It was this beautiful gym and there was nobody in it. And it closed a year later. But while it was open, I was there regularly. I was really enjoying the fact that, you know, there weren't that many people here. It's a small town. And it was a CrossFit gym. I wasn't taking any classes or whatever, but they had tons of fun equipment and I'm creative and I liked playing with that stuff. But the CrossFit, the class would come in and have, occasionally I would be there, you know, intersecting when there was a class there. Very nice people, and, you know, just got to know some of them, and we would also watch them in the class, right? It's not something that interests me. I just wanted the access to the equipment. And but the class was very interesting because these people it was really impressive what they were doing. I mean, like, they're doing big lifts and all that kind of stuff. But also, it was also interesting to hear the conversation, the culture that they had around the activities that they were doing. Obviously, they did occasional fun runs and 5Ks, and there was a few competitions and stuff like that. But the discussions around injury was pretty interesting because a lot of them were injured and had been injured in the probably doing that. And they would tell stories. Oh, did you hear what happened to Jerry? Jerry, he blew out his blah, blah, blah. And he's in the hospital. But it was almost like, you know, war stories kind of thing where, you know, that's part of the currency of that situation. I know I want no part of that. I am not interested in doing something ballistic if it's gonna tear my shoulder. I already did that, right? I already know enough that I don't want to move closer to that in a way that really amps up the risk for me. I mean, I'd love to learn to surf someday. I'm sure there's some risk involved in that, you know. There are some other things that I do like doing that are a little more high exertion, but
so you were at the
I'm also aware of just what the downside can be, like, you know.
Right.
So
you're at the CrossFit gym, not for the CrossFit class. You said, I wanted access to the equipment, I'm creative, and I wanted to play around. So what were you doing that presumably was quite different than what they were doing in the class?
I was the only one using the sled. they had a weight sled, you know, you put a harness and then you drag it, and I was just walking really slow because I was just investigating my support in walking. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is a great way to test whether I have really clear support. Am I finding that thing over my hip joint, whatever? Like, I'm like a little, you know, self-taught. I'm a little scientist in there trying to figure out if I do this, if I do that. I'm not going to go play football. I'm not, you know, using it to be able to do an Olympic lift or whatever. But that was really fun to test different weights. To me, that's a nice use of my time. I'm being creative. I'm experimenting. I'm really paying attention to what I find out. And I have a context with myself where that has value. That's really fun to me.
The word support, and you also use the words experiment and you used a lot of good words there. But so we can make it a little more concrete. You know, again, we're teaching something known as the Feldenkrais Method, created by Moshe Feldenkrais, but he left the planet in 1984. It's been some time. And he sort of famously just lived this very dramatic life. He taught a lot of things. There's archives, and those of us who teach these days have a lot of archives to draw on. And he said a number of things many times, which some of us think of as the principles of the work. However, he didn't necessarily write them all down on a piece of paper. In my experience, and I know significant for you, and one of the ways we know each other is a Feldenkrais trainer named Jeff Haller, who I think of as someone who really kind of made a point of, you know, when he runs his trainings, he said, let's talk about the principles and we'll go through them. But just for people listening to if we can go back to the CrossFit gym, you're experimenting, you're pulling weight, you're walking, or is it like a thing where you're walking backwards? You have like a kind of a chain around your belt, that kind of situation?
You have a harness basically around your shoulders. It's connected, you know, there's a leash going out of your back onto a metal sled, and you can stack weight.
So the weight is
on
behind you and you're walking forward, but obviously the weight is giving you resistance. So it's not as simple as walking in the street, because there's, okay.
Exactly. So, you can turn it around and walk backwards and pull it that way too.
Right. So let's just say, so Andrew's at the CrossFit gym, he's walking and he's pulling a weight, he's experimenting, and I don't know why this is third person. You are doing these things and you're thinking.
He sounds really cool.
I know. This guy, Andrew, you should meet. But the thing that you're thinking of, I'm sure there's other categories. For example, I'll throw in another one, which would be the quality of your breathing. But could you just explain a little bit for someone who maybe doesn't know what it means to work with a principle while you're improvising? What does that look like a little bit for you in that moment?
You know, certainly there's part of what I did there was just exercise. I used the rowing machine, 20 minutes, 30 minutes on the rowing machine, and then I would go. But when I did stuff with weights, or, there's a pull-up rack and stuff like that, I'm aware that I've had a couple of injuries. I'm also very aware that I have a propensity to hurt myself if I do it poorly. I know this about myself. I have evidence. It's not just like I have an inkling, right? I have done this before. So what I would do if I was going to do pull-ups, I wouldn't just, grab on the bar and just try to just pull myself up, because I could probably do 2 badly, right? So what do? Do you just murder yourself to do 2 and then just try to, I'm old enough now that it's not really how I want to spend my time. I'd much rather work on understanding the form, right? Having decent form. So I would string up a bunch of resistance bands. You can do YouTube videos about this. You loop resistance bands and then you step into the resistance band. So instead of weighing what you weigh 75 pounds less. Okay, then suddenly the pull-up is easy, right? Now you start to float up a little more. Okay, so why do that? I mean, you're not even building muscle if it's super easy. Yeah, so I'm manipulating the situation so that I can get to a level of exertion that there's enough challenge that, it's not just launching me up in the air. I do have to pull, but it allows me an environment where I can pay attention to some things that are difficult for me to pay attention to if I just pull my entire weight. Pulling my entire weight is not a situation where I can learn. That's a situation where all I can learn is try harder, which, okay, maybe I do need to try harder or whatever, but that was not really what I was interested in. It's not what I was about.
Talk about something called the Weber-Fechner Law here, where it was actually figured out by a couple scientists by those 2 names. Just what you just said, like if I have to work really hard, my ability to be sensitive to small details, it's not there. So yeah, there's kind of a moment where you have to be willing to say, it's not about how many pull-ups I do, but it's about being able to feel how I'm doing what I'm doing, and then you can get to the form. And
I mean, there's also a lot of factors going in there. Like, so what's important, Andrew? Are you trying to just never really do any pull-ups? No, I think I would like to be able to do one good one, right? And so maybe I need to get more fit. There's like a period of strengthening of other stuff. It's a long range project for somebody like me. But the question is, how can I create a situation where my skill can actually scale? When people they finally decide they're going to get fit, right? And they're tired of what they weigh or however they feel or whatever, and they're going to go get fit. And then they go nuts at the gym and they hurt themselves, or it's too much, right? Like that can't scale.
Right.
That's why it feels like that. It's because you get to do that once, and hopefully you're lucky enough not to get injured. But
you said
I'm interested in skill that can right. scale responsibly.
You know that you could injure yourself if you're not careful. Yes. So again,
and I'm also aware that avoiding the injury is actually, it's more valuable to me than doing
Right.
10 pull-ups
So
or whatever.
I'm going to kind of keep coming back because I'm just interested for listeners to get really specific with something. You're walking, you're pulling a weight, and you know that there's a way that you might do it if you don't pay enough attention. If you're a little sloppy or you rush too much or you're too goal driven, that you could hurt yourself. But you already know that because you've got that experience and you've also got a practice. And we talked before about what might happen in your class, where I think you're probably aware a bit of that internal discussion. But just to get very specific again, you mentioned support. So how does support relate when you're walking, pulling that weight to whether or not you're going to have an injury? Or let's put another thing. Let's also include maybe how does support relate to you discover how to pull that weight across the room and it feels like a feather. Like let's put the positive, possibility there too. What are you noticing, like with each step you take related to support? What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, this all has to do with how are you willing to measure your experience, or another way of saying, how are you willing to value your experience? So one way of pulling the weight is, I got to do 20 of these. What I do is I put 150 pounds on a sled. I walk, I get to the finish line and then I go back and I do that 20 times and that's part of my workout. And then I feel tired and my legs work. And that's a certain way of measuring how I'm doing in life, right? If I do that regularly, and I have a week where I should have got more sleep last night or whatever. It's a way of you're orienting in your life a little bit. To me, because of what I do for a living, and because I'm also very interested in walking and just the upright situation. When I'm pulling the sled, I don't care about getting it to the end. I mean, I will go there. I will just feel, okay, I'm at the end of the track and now I got to turn around. But in the moment of stepping, I'm paying attention to something else. I'm working out, what am I doing with my pelvis and my spine relative to the turn away from the back leg towards the front leg, for instance, right? That this little moment in walking where there's a little bit of a turn, a little bit of a lengthening of the pubic bone, that to me is very specific.
And that word support also relates to the floor that you're stepping on, does it not?
Right. Well, there's really two ways to think about support. One is, yes, there's how well connected you are with your foot to the ground, right? Because if you're going to pull the heavy weight, you're going to have to push the floor that way in order to go this way. And so your foot has to be of a certain shape and it has to be placed nicely. And there's a certain timing with what you do up through your leg that produces decent muscular action. And there's one that produces kind of a collapsing feeling. And so I'm very aware of that. So that's the external support. But then there's internal support, which is what's happening all the way up through the kinematic chain of all the joints. There's a real compositional thing happening where it's not just about where my foot is or the shape of my foot. There's a sequence of things that is happening. I'm interested in the sequence. I'm not just interested in hammering the sequence as if I know exactly. I'm actually deliberately creating a moment where I let myself be uncertain. And I try a few different varieties. And why do I try a few different varieties? Because I have a few clients that have a few different varieties, and I'm actually interested in what it feels like to walk like them. And so I use that as part of a little bit of a professional study. But then I'm also, of course, dealing with improving my own walking. And so I'm curious how to do it. That's practice. Now, if you were, I have a good story about this. The young woman who often was at the desk at the place, she taught some of the classes and, worked there. After I'd been coming there for a couple of months, right? She had seen me, on a first name basis, hey, how's it going? And there was one day where when I was leaving, she said, can I ask you a question? And I said, oh, sure. And she goes, yeah, you're not like everybody else that comes into the gym. And I said, oh, I said, uh-oh. I said, you know, why? What do you mean? And she goes, well, you like really take your time. And I see you like trying different things with the bands, and there's the like some, like when you're pulling the weight, you like stop and then you change something and then you try it again, but you're not like in a rush. She's like, I just try to get my workout over with. I do my routine. I just like, I just want to get it over with. Okay, two very different models of practice, right? She's just wanting to derive whatever the strength or the cardio benefit or whatever. It's just a matter of convenience to get it done. I'm using it for a different layer of training or experience, right? I mean, she may be in better shape than I am, right? She may be fitter, she may be stronger than I am, but the way we're approaching what we're doing, the way we're actually using our experience is different. And to me, that's an important thing for anybody to confront, because in the end, your own personal creativity with what you're doing, it's important, because a lot of people get bored with certain forms of exercise. I mean, exercise is very important. I'm not knocking exercise, but people do get bored. And those people should learn, well, that's because of the way you're paying attention to it too. There's a lot more in there. It can feel, even if they're good at it, there are ways of using your attention creatively and skillfully that will make it way more fun, way more pleasant, way more powerful, if that's what you want or whatever. And the problem is that people aren't really shown what that inner experience is like or what that world is like. And it takes a bit of time for sure. And they have to want to know that stuff, right? They have to be curious or motivated either by negative experience or positive experiences. They have to know that that's there. And then when they start to learn about it, what do they do with it, right? So, but yeah. I find that the movement practice question, one is just like, do you work on something? Are you interested in something? There's a way that a person can sort of have a movement practice, and then when you see it and it's fine for it not to measure up to whatever your expectations are or whatever. If it's helping them, that's great. But the other thing is like, what's it for? Can you explain the value of it to yourself privately? Like, that's something that a lot of people may not do, which is, what am I doing this for? What am I trying to get somewhere? Is there a performative arena that if I got to would be meaningful to me? Like, do I want to run a 5K? Not because I'm trying to be like a great, on a running team, but just I have goals in my life. I want to do this. Or, next year the family's going on a trip to blah, 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 and we're going to climb a lot of mountains. I'm going to start to get in shape now, rather than get there and be at high altitude and realize I can barely even enjoy this time that we plan together. Like, that's a great goal to have. You don't have to be an athlete or a musician on a stage or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the reason that I wanted to have this conversation, the whole reason for this YouTube channel, is to hopefully help people to level up the movement practice. I think you've made clear movement practice can take these many forms, but there is a moment, whether I'm trying to perfect my tennis serve, or I'm a rock climber, or maybe I work a desk job and I have found that meditation, is really helpful to me, but sometimes I'm just can't sit to meditate and be comfortable enough that, the benefits of the meditation really come through in a consistent way. And so it really is about living a better life, even though meditation might be part of the better life, or being able to rock climb with my rock climbing friends is part of the better life, but it's the better life that we're after. It's funny, this is maybe a strange tangent, or maybe not, but I was just hearing some statistics and I don't even remember exactly what they were, but the sort of huge uptick in the number of Americans who would define themselves as not being religious, as opposed to, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago. I always joke that I was raised as a devout atheist. That was kind of my household. Like, no, like I was shown televangelists on TV, like Jerry Falwell, and it was kind of like, well, that's religion, and obviously that's craziness. So, and then there was a moment as a young adult to kind of go like, holy crap, there is a reason that people, you know, get together and they believe in something bigger than themselves. And, you know, my own history might make it hard for me to get in a conversation with someone else about God. But when I was young, I actually had that conversation with myself when I put on music and I sort of flailed around in my room in response to the sound, you know, because that's when something happened inside of me that was bigger. And I described that I was at a point before.
Is there a part of that it's...
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, isn't there the movement practice? It's, you know, it's not really, I mean, certainly in the Feldenkrais method, right? There's no Feldenkrais Olympics. There's no competitive aspect or even performative aspect, you know, to the method. It's all about a sort of a process of refinement or discovery or whatever. I think it can be in the hands of a skillful teacher. It can absolutely be about a performative result for sure. But that being said, it's not as if you're gearing up for the Feldenkrais competition next fall or whatever. It's supposed to have a cash value in some other arena of your life, right? Now, maybe that arena is just not being in pain. That's a perfectly wonderful arena to stand in, to not be in pain and to not have to deal with that. But there's a lot of ways to then move and apply your understanding towards the stuff that really gives you that spiritual value in life, whether it's music or it's climbing mountains or being out there or whatever.
Well, it's, you know, I could point to the experience of running. I'm not a marathon runner or anything like that, but I've run fairly regularly, you know, for a number of years. I guess that's the one habit I picked up when I was playing soccer as a young person. They made us run and it was more like they made us back then. But, you know, these days, if I just feel like, gosh, I've been sitting around the house too much, likely I'm going to go for a run. That's how I'm going to get my movement in. And I run better for sure, thanks to this practice, which in my case is largely the Feldenkrais method. Although the reason, part of why I keep resisting making this a conversation about the method that we both teach is that I do think it's larger than that. And although Absolutely. I think, you know, the Feldenkrais method as such might well be something, you know, for sure, if you're watching this and you've never experienced Feldenkrais method, it's something that I recommend you find out about. But I think what's even deeper than that is like, let's just sort of say, I could practice the Feldenkrais method in a lousy way, and I'd have lousy results, right? And
you can play Beethoven in a truly lousy way, and right. it doesn't do great things, right. Let me tell you.
But so I run better, but I'm also, you know, a parent, and sometimes my 12-year-old seems to have a knack for pushing me to my limit, right? You know, but I actually think my practice, my movement practice, or what I call sometimes I think of it broader. I'll call it the phrase I used before was a personal growth practice. Mm-hmm. Although I think a movement is an absolutely required part of any personal growth practice. That's my opinion. You know, and someone who says, well, for me, it's just about prayer. I might even, that's fine for them, but in my mind, I might be saying, well, prayer is actually movement on one level. You know, there is movement there, and it's not insignificant. But for me, you know, it's also about self-regulation. So if I'm with my daughter and I want to show up in a way that, you know, she feels safe, she feels good, she's having a good time with dad, but it just so happens that dad's getting kind of irked about something. My ability to stay in the place where we have a nice communication. Also, it relates to what you were talking about at the CrossFit gym. If I am rolled way over on my ankle, you know, and just standing up is painful, my ability to interact with my daughter is not the same than if I find clear support from the ground. If I have some understanding of the structure of my body such that I can sort of, tweak and shift, even in the background, because maybe my focus is not, I'm not in movement class right now, I'm having dinner with my daughter. But there's something about my movement practice that actually still relates to the quality of our dinner conversation.
Yeah. I'm going to raise my hand just because of our internet lag or whatever. Yeah. There's, obviously a good, or maybe not so obviously, a good movement practice is also supposed to help. It's supposed to help you discover something about yourself, maybe that you didn't know, right? To help you discover not just maybe a physical potential, although that's a very nice thing to discover, right? Or it's certainly a lovely thing to discover how to maintain your physical potential as you're getting older. But of course, there are also these metaphorical. I mean, we human beings are going to make certain connections and meanings, whether you tell them to or not. And a good practice should help you learn what it means to be oriented in uncertainty, right? Because you're improvising your life every day, right? I mean, there are ways in which you try not to be improvising, but we all know that your life has a lot of uncertainty built into it. And so a person that has a long-term movement practice that with some discipline and rigor to it and self-care and appreciation or whatever, hopefully that practice is not just about some sort of exertive hour that is just like an executive stress ball for them to, I mean, that's also a fine use, but I think a richer kind of practice is really an opportunity for both action and reflection. Like, what's the benefit of having done Feldenkrais for 20 years? Like, for me personally, like, one of the benefits, I can't pole vault, or I can't lift 500 pounds because I do Feldenkrais. But part of what it has really helped me is to listen very, very clearly to my body, so that if for some reason things take a downturn, I'm aware that they're taking a downturn sooner. And I take care of the maintenance functions. I turn those knobs back where they should be. I regulate things in my life a lot better. When I was in my late teens or my 20s, I didn't know those knobs existed.
So can you tell a story along those lines? Maybe it's a personal story, or maybe it's about one of your clients, just related to the last year, related to the pandemic, which, I mean, if we've ever dealt with uncertainty, this is it, right? I knew before we started that I was kind of interested in asking you about what we might say we've touched on here is kind of like the non-movement, quote unquote, applications of a movement practice. But everyone watching this has been, no one escaped this experience over the last year. Is there a way that your practice has helped you personally, or can you tell a story about a client, over the last year that dealing with this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think of I'm just going through the people in my practice today. Just I mean, maybe I should just tell a story about myself, because like most people during the pandemic, it was talk about uncertainty, right? My house is just like a Zoom factory. Both of our kids were remote, for the entire year. So one daughter was Zooming in the kitchen, another one Zooming in another room. My wife is Zooming her classes downstairs. I'm up here, and you don't know what's going on. And part of what happened, we're lucky in that my clientele moved online. That was pretty much without a hiccup. But thank God I have my particular movement practice, or my particular profession. I have an application where talking and giving verbal instruction is actually a skillful part of the means that we use to teach. And but with myself, I mean, I gained weight. I was eating too much, drinking too much. You're in your house all day. You're not supposed to go out. Blah 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 blah. And eventually, that got pretty old. And so I just started running. And I don't like to run. I've never sought that out. I was on track in high school, but it was quite hilarious. So, but I just started running just to get outside, fresh air, and, get away from my desk for a period of time. And that has led to one of the nicest developments just in my own physical culture with myself in my life. Like, I run now, I'm really happy with the way I run now. Could never have said that. Have I applied myself quite rigorously to what I'm doing? I'm spending a lot of time walking, running, and skipping backwards. I now have a butt. I have quads now. I've figured out I've been really kind of like woodshedding a lot of anatomy and musculature, and then applying that in my study of the lessons. And that has been unbelievably fun, because I'm definitely somebody that can handle detail and specificity. And I like discovering my blind spots. That's been my profession for the past 20 years, certainly with clients. And I like that autodidact nature of the work. And again, what's fun to me is I've been able to get even more creative. I started taking a Tai Chi class online. Very different context, very different vocabulary. The things that I've had to do were quite difficult for me. My legs were just weak. I just was like, oh my God, I have to stand like this on one leg with the other leg out for 5 minutes. Like, whew. And the teacher's advice in the course is, yeah, your leg's going to burn. But, that's a self-imposed challenge on my part, but having, again, a different kind of puzzle to solve, coming from a different arena. I really enjoy that kind of thing. So yeah, working online with people has been actually really great. I really kind of enjoyed both the fact that, like I said earlier in our conversation, I'm aware of some of the ways in which in a group class, the connection between the student and the teacher can get a little lost, and you can see it happening in various ways. And that's why, occasionally I say, okay, everybody stop, let's do that again, that kind of thing. But, it's been really nice to work online one-on-one with people, because it's not just you're giving them movement instructions and they just do it and you do that for an hour. I know more and more, better and better, what I see when somebody is moving. And of course, there's a very rich challenge in helping them come to an understanding using their own hands on themselves, et cetera. And that's been very rich. But also because, unlike a hands-on session, where sometimes there's no talking at all, sometimes there is talking, but unlike that, it's very useful for them to describe to me what they're feeling, what they're experiencing when they make the movement, right? And that becomes a very, in this context, a much more necessary part of the exchange, so that, again, they are learning to self-qualify. Obviously, I'm reflecting back what yes, that's better if that's that way, and whatever. But that self-qualification process, it can be that much more explicit, which I really like,
I mean, it would seem that, because what you're talking about, it makes me think, I've had a couple of clients tell me, there were a number of people who worked with me, and they came to my studio, and I was doing functional integration, and they felt my hands, and then they were not so happy that wasn't possible, when the pandemic really set in. But some of those same folks over time have told me about the value of what they got by not being able to have access to my touch and whatnot. And it was sort of like...
And why is that?
Well, it's because it's the word you used earlier, which I almost feel like I want to add into my phrase about sustainable, meaningful growth practice, but use the word responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think at a certain point, we have to take on more responsibility. And I mean, we could go broader than movement practice. We could talk about taking responsibility, in your life. But again, I think the movement practice is central. It's, I mean, in terms of like the example I gave before about I'm talking to my daughter, how does this relate to my movement practice? Of course, when I go to a class with a teacher, or even when I just set my timer for 15 minutes and meditate, right, it's a formal space and time that I've set aside for something that I call practice. But it's kind of like a dress rehearsal for the rest of the day, because, you know, you're at the CrossFit gym, you're walking with the weight, but you're also going to walk to your car when you leave the gym. You're going to, you know, you're going to be walking. So, yeah. So,
yeah, I mean, the thing is, you're crafting your life. That's one of the things that happens. Like if you're lucky enough to play an instrument for many years and you get better and better, or you have a movement practice or whatever it is, or you cook, right? And you cook for many years and you get better. But like, one of the benefits of those kinds of things is you really start to understand the time scale that's necessary, so that you tend to become more patient with yourself. That's a very nice outcome my movement practice has given me. You tend to be more patient. You start to see that taking pleasure in something, there's different ways of taking pleasure in something. Like, many people can go and hear a concert pianist play at Carnegie Hall. I go, and you great pleasure in hearing that. That's one form of pleasure. That's a passive literacy, right? To be able to go and just enjoy the program that the pianist played. That's very, very different than being able to play that music. That's another level of pleasure, and obviously another level of dedication, but it is different. It's very different to take pleasure in playing Bach than in just listening to Bach, right? And I'm not saying that you can't have a profound experience just listening to Bach. I get it, right? But there's a different level. There's passive literacy and there's active literacy, and active literacy feels different.
So I have a quote now. I'm remembering a quote from you.
Yeah.
Get to quote you. But I heard you say in one of the classes something to the effect of, pleasure is a reward for skill.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, that's one of the big that's one of the big Kensho moments, you know, the enlightenment moments that happens if you spend enough thousands of hours at an instrument. It's not that fun all the time, right? It's not meant to be drudgery, but it's not as if practicing your scales, or like, yes, that's all nutritious. You have to learn that stuff, but that's not necessarily where you're taking all the pleasure. The pleasure is coming from your ability to construct something of greater value. And the people who are lucky enough to grow up in communities where, if you're a kid that grows up and you're around music all the time, you just hear people, you know, hey, mom and dad have their friends over every Thursday and they play chamber music, or the dad was a jazz, whatever. And they would always play. And so I heard that stuff growing up. You intuitively understand the relationship between what that nice compositional thing can sound like once you build it. And that makes the building process more pleasant and more sort of worth it or justified. It enables you to kind of to have a reason to spend all this attentional capital, right? A lot of people don't have a good relationship with paying attention. It's not fun for them. They don't like it. There's a variety of reasons for that. But that really sucks, because when you really learn how to enjoy the process of attending, it's not just a challenge. Can I pay attention to it? But you actually understand how to marshal and manage your attention in useful ways, reliably, repeatedly. Whoo, that's, you know, those are the people that are paid the big bucks in society, the people that can do that stuff.
Well, and movement teachers aren't necessarily famous for being paid the big bucks.
No. But I just mean somebody who's really can marshal their capacities.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and the argument I want,
regardless of domain, you know.
Yeah. Maybe I'm about to argue that we should get a raise, but what I was going to say is, you know, if you look around right now, there's a lot of pull on everyone's attention right now. And so you talk about the difficulty of attention, and it's very real. And if, you know, even if it weren't for social media, there's probably 20 things pulling on, certainly any parent's attention at any given time, especially if they got more than one kid or whatnot. Mm. But this does seem to me, and I think much broader than what you and I do, there has been this explosion of people doing movement classes in their living room over the last year. Yeah. And I think, it's actually, I don't know if there be officially called essential workers, but if people hadn't had their movement classes over the last year, I think we'd be in a very different world right now. And I think that this distinction that we've been playing with between teaching just movement, in other words, here's the movement, do this movement, put your arm here, do that, do this. But this idea of teaching people how to pay attention, because you talk about the person who doesn't really like to pay attention, but let's just say that person comes to your class and they are convinced, well, I think this is good for me, so I'll keep coming. If they come for a few months, can that person improve their ability to pay attention? And if so, how does that happen?
Yes, they can. Clearly. I mean, I have plenty of relationships and conversations and testimonials with clients, etc. But
let me be a little more specific then, because I'll put it this way, because maybe there's movement teachers watching this conversation too. So for you as a teacher,
right?
If someone comes to class and they tell you about physical problems and you understand, okay, well, maybe there's a particular biomechanical thing that they need to understand. But if you also get the sense this person's has a little difficulty paying attention, they're not yet paying attention at the level that they would need to actually, solve this problem with the shoulder or the hip or whatever it is. Well, what are some of the things that you would do as a teacher in terms of really on this side of the aisle, not so much the teaching movement side, but teaching attention? Is there something you could say about your approach to that?
Well, I mean, clearly you're moving away from talking about a group class into you're talking about giving advice for just anybody out there? Or are you talking about like more along the lines of a one-on-one?
I mean, maybe it's funny for listeners because I'm in my mind, I'm referring to having been to group classes that you teach, but I think actually in group classes, I referred to stand your feet. And then, how did you just do that? For example, you've taught a class where you would ask people stand their feet, and then you'd say, how far away did you put your feet from the pelvis? How far is the left foot from the midline? How far is the right foot from the midline? Can you now put the left foot further out to the left? Can you bring it close to the middle? Can you turn your heels in? Can you turn them out? And there's a reason you're doing that. And of course, it has something to do with the biomechanics of all those positions, but you're also asking them to pay attention to something that maybe they never paid because they could have just stood their feet and then started to do the next thing. Oh, maybe I'm going to
wait. Aren't we going to do bridges? Yes, we're going to do bridges, or maybe we'll do bridges in all those positions. But
why not just say, all right, lift your pelvis into the air? Why stop before? And what are you doing there?
Well, again, in that example, if you're going to have them compare, right, the act of comparing the different positions of the feet and the effect on what it does to the pelvis, that's really in the realm of learning. That's in the realm of, again, not being so much interested in just regurgitating a finished product. Like, okay, let's do bridges. That's okay, everybody, we're going to do 20 bridges, ready, go. That's fine. That's fine. That's a performative context. And a lot of exercise is performative. You are not going to get the benefits of exercise by removing exertion. It doesn't work that way, right? So the exertion is the point. Now, obviously buried in there, right, is, but you can't exert in such a disorganized way that you go for a run in order to get the physical benefit of going for a run, but you hurt your back in the process. Nobody wants to do that, yet it happens, right? And so at what point are we going to deal with that? Well, what is that conversation like? Oh, well, I'm going to go see the massage therapist or the physical therapist or my yoga teacher or whoever they go to for help, or I'll go to my doctor. All of those people, the Feldenkrais teacher, they will give you advice, right? They may dispense advice or a prescription or a protocol or a number of sessions or whatever it is. But again, buried in this little interaction, right, is, okay, so I'll do those stretches. Okay, I'll do those exercises. Okay, I'll get this done. I'll put the heat on me. Is it heat or ice? All these kind. The person is dying for a prescription to get this thing away, but that does not get to the level of understanding. Now, maybe they're not going to ever know what actually happened on that day, on that hill, when they took that step, where I'm not talking about they have a magic time machine, obviously, but the level of understanding that allows you to not have that problem again is not really at the level of prescription necessarily, because you need to become more remedial. What do you understand about your back at that point, right? And if the person has been doing bridges and they feel great, but today they kind of injured their hip, again, what's the assembly of attention, and how's it going to be used to either avoid hurting themselves further in this class where they're going to do the bridge, or to actually have the context of the class be a situation where they finally understand that they never put their right ankle like this, they always put it like that, and they finally learn that how those two things are specifically related, not just theoretically related, but practically related to how the muscles of their leg fire, what their back does to compensate, but they can actually learn that relationship, and it's possible, again, depending on the way the lesson is taught, or whether they repeat it, or they, how specifically they get it, it's possible that they can clean up that little mess. Maybe not in one class, but maybe they can clean up that mess for the rest of their life. Wouldn't that be nice, right? And so that's what that training of attention is for. I can pretty much, I'd feel comfortable betting my money that pretty much every injury that takes place in an exercise or a gym context, or certainly a lot of them, are moments where, for whatever reason, your attention was not part of the solution.
Right.
Or, maybe you were just, I was going to do that last one, and because there are things that happen. I watched a video the other day of a guy doing a preacher curl on a bench. You put your elbow on the slanted platform, and his bicep tendon, he's massive weight, and he goes down and the bicep tendon pops. You can see it. It's awful.
Yeah.
Now, okay, in hindsight, right? Oh, that was not a good thing to do, right? But was there any information going on in the system? I don't just mean culturally or practically, but could you feel in your arm, oh my God, no, wait, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it today, right? The inhibitory function is quite valuable to understand, right? And that most people don't really have, most people's practices aren't really about understanding the importance of the inhibitory functions.
Well, and
which is how to modulate your effort, how to reverse out of, we can get into that whole conversation, but that requires attention at a different level.
When I started to ask this question, you sort of said, well, are we talking about working with an individual? Because clearly this is an easier conversation than I'm looking at a Zoom screen and there's, a dozen people on the Zoom screen. But, I think, and maybe it's more what people showed up for. If they came for awareness through movement, they didn't come for CrossFit. They said, oh, awareness through movement class, that's what I want to do. If you read any of the promotional material, you probably did get the drift that this is going to be slower, that you might have been told that it has something to do with your attention. But it is interesting. And of course, if you go to a meditation class as well, there's something there too, where maybe 20 people are in the room, and I haven't been to a meditation class recently, so I don't know exactly how a meditation teacher will approach it, but I imagine that there is something about the quality of the experience that's being asked for, even though I don't get to go around and specifically check in with each person in the class. I mean, you might have another story that relates to a one-on-one work, you know, someone who maybe you worked with on something we could call attention training. But I thought it was worth underlying, and I guess keep coming back to these moments in the class about the instructions or the placing of the feet and not moving on to the bridge, because I think it is actually possible at least to show people in a group context how they might work with themselves, you know, on their own time. And I think that's part of what you defined as being essential to a practice. It's, you don't just show up for class, you know, after class or tomorrow or next week, you're going to go back to maybe some tidbit from class, but you're going to practice something. You've often talked about, you called it, I think, what was it? Commuter. Anyway, standing on the platform, the New York subway, doing practices. You got however long till the train comes. How are you going to use your time? You could valuably, you know, productively make use of that situation to work on, we could say your movement, but to work with your attention. I
mean, it could be, I mean, a person could fix their back pain by understanding what and how to practice in standing and sitting on their commute. I have done this, right? I've helped other people do this, where it's like, look, this is a big chunk of time every day, 40 minutes this way, 40 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. I'm not saying you have to practice all of them, but it is regular, right? The discipline part is already built in. The problem is that you're dressed in regular clothes and you have a coat and a backpack and you think you need to be in gym clothes. Maybe you don't, right? Maybe there's a couple of details that, again, you're not noticing about the way you sit down in the chair and the way you keep your weight in that particular way for 40 minutes. That might have something to do with why that place in your back, that injury keeps getting maintained for however long it's been there. So the part of it is to create a better game. It's to gamify the situation a little better for people so that it's not, I mean, part of that the notion of how you use your attention, that takes a while for a person to get oriented in, like how they pay attention, but you're moving all the time. I'm doing it right now, talking, I'm gesturing with my hands, I'm shifting my weight over the stool. Like these kinds of things are, they seem to be hidden in everyday life. You know, well, I'm just sitting. I'm not really, I'm not swinging a big sledgehammer or something like that. Yes, but sitting means that your weight is above the pelvis. And how much weight is there? Well, maybe there's 120 pounds and it's on the pelvis. Yeah, if you shift your pelvis under you in a different way, that 120 pounds becomes a real problem on certain vertebrae, you know? And this information is available to you on an ongoing basis, right? So that the understanding of how you, quote, include your attention or you pay attention in the situation, one of the benefits of that is you can turn many situations to your advantage that in the past were just like, you know, in other words, you could be training yourself further out of away from the negative experience and towards a healthier experience, you know,
if I don't know something about what I would do on the subway platform, there's a chance that I'll never fix my back. Because if it can only happen,
I'll give you a great example. I'll give you a great example. Okay. Piano teacher sees a student every week for a year. That student doesn't practice. However, they do come to their lesson because their mother or their father drops them off at the lesson. Student doesn't practice. Childhood now. It's a lot of childhoods. Student doesn't practice. Yeah. Student has a song that they're supposed to learn or a piece of music that they are supposed to learn. They're not really learning at it. They're pretending to want to learn it. They don't even really want to be there as part of the problem. There is no context for music in their life. Maybe the parents are just like, well, you know, we moved to the burbs and it's time for Johnny to get piano lessons. Like that is not uncommon, right? The recital is coming, right? Now the kid is going to have to play this piece. They cram for it. I mean, this has certain metaphorical similarities to the way people deal with their injuries or their, you know, it's not, these things can't necessarily just be solved at 1 hour a week or 45 minutes a week, but for some people they can be. And it's just the culture that's telling you you should have one piano lesson a week. Depends. You really want to learn the piano? You want to get really good? Don't have one lesson a week. If you want more than one lesson, if you really want to learn and your finances are available, you should, that's not what the great musicians who became great pianists, I'm pretty sure that they don't have one lesson a week. Like when I was at Marlborough in maybe the second or third year, I've been going up there for about 10 years now. And at one point I saw Richard Good, who is one of the artistic directors of Marlborough, one of the great living pianists. And Richard had been a client and was one of the reasons I was invited up there. And Richard was out for a walk, he's just going for a walk. And Richard is singing to himself. Now, I don't know exactly what Richard is singing, but I would imagine Richard is kind of practicing, right? I wouldn't be surprised. I don't actually know. I didn't interrupt the man's walk. But it's not uncommon for musicians at a certain skill level to work on their pieces away from their instruments, right? This can be done, right?
Well, so that implies something, and I think this is actually well documented. I'm thinking of one of the various, brain books I probably read when I was in my Feldenkrais training. But it was about those studies they did with people where some of them would practice their scales for 2 weeks and the other group would imagine practicing their scales for 2 weeks. Like they would actually put aside time. They just wouldn't be at the piano, but they would think, okay, my thumb pressing down that key and then my index finger. And I think sometimes would improve more than the people.
Yes.
But the point being that the imagination, I was thinking this would just maybe be another area, as long as we don't completely run out of steam at some point, but is the role of the imagination. And of course, within the context of the Feldenkrais method, this is something that Feldenkrais was very clear on. He used to talk about the self-image. He famously said, we act according to our self-image. So my hip trouble sometimes might be because my way of imagining what my hip joint is or where my hip joint is or how my hip joint works might just not be the reality of what my hip joint is.
Yes. Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are probably misinterpreting your anatomy to some extent.
I can improve. You talked about during the pandemic, pulling out the anatomy books and just filling in essentially more of the image of, oh, that's how my shoulder works, or whatever the case may be. But in the practice of awareness through movement, there's a kind of a peculiar thing, which some people find not so easy to deal with at first, but it has an incredible utility, especially for someone who is managing an injury, which is that you told me that the first thing in the lesson was to put my hand on top of my head because we're going to do X, Y, and Z with the hand on top of the head. But I think that's going to be, excruciatingly painful because I'm dealing with this problem in my shoulder. I don't think I can lift my hand that high. And then you'd say to me, oh, that's okay. You can imagine it. And first time you tell me that, I might think, what are you talking about? But I've done this a million times now. Like there's some of the famous examples of this, or I say famous, within the practitioner community, where we sometimes teach lessons that involve painting, right? There's a lesson where you paint your feet. What do? You essentially lie on your back, and the person who's looking through the window to see what's going on in the Feldenkrais class, they think everyone's asleep. But what people are doing is imagining a paintbrush running from their big toe to the heel. And then they're imagining from the second toe, and we go through the foot. And then, the teacher says, okay, cool, now take a rest. But do you notice that something feels different? And it's not just my left foot that feels different. It's my entire left leg is now different than my right leg. And if you tell me to stand up and walk around the room, I'm going to find the way I support myself through the left side of my body is entirely different than the other. So what did I do? Not anything that most people would describe as movement, but I imagined something. And, this could be a way of us telling people how great the Feldenkrais method is. But again, I think it's a broader thing. I think just the understanding of what the human imagination can bring to bear on our situation. I feel like it's another piece that to get the most out of your movement practice, you would want to know about.
Well, and it's also the word imagination for some people means something different than what maybe we're intending it in the conversation. Some people will think that if you imagine the movement, that means you're just kind of inventing something, or it's sort of you're making it up in your head. And so again, these these practices or these notions, they really have to, there needs to be a strong context for them when they're introduced to people, so they understand what the target is that they're really aiming for. And if you just drop into the middle of a class that is advertised as sitting with better posture or whatever it is, and then without warning the teacher says, okay, imagine your neck getting longer, and there's a party that goes, what, like, what the hell is that, right? But it is a well documented, and it can be a very practical path into understanding how your attention works, but also how you begin to understand what your attention feels like. Most people don't really have a very practical on the ground experience of what their attentional quality feels like. They may know today I feel kind of logy, and today I feel really bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but there may not be a lot of experience with that. There is a way in which the simple use of attention, the way it might be used in a body scan or something like this, what is that about, right? Well, there's a lot of ways it can be used, but one of the ways is to simply orient the person to what their kinesthetic experience is in the moment. It's a way of helping someone become more present, maybe, rather than like the person who's impatient, who's saying, oh, imagine this. That person is already out of the attentional loop, right? Even if they're trying to get in, they're just struggling to get back in, right? A musician, if you tell me to imagine the song Hey Jude, I can do it. I'm singing in my head right now, right? Now, can everybody do that? I don't know. Does my musical training make that an easier experience for me to conjure and self-report back, whatever? But again, in relationship to this notion of practice, I've told this story before, you walk through a conservatory, a music school, and you listen to the students practicing. They play their instruments at a high level, but what you can often eavesdrop on is a lot of compulsive practicing, right? Which is essentially practicing that keeps looking for a physical manifestation of a finished product. Am I done yet? Did I get it? And, it's really worth considering that one more repetition of that passage is not necessarily what you need, right? Because the part of the passage that you keep getting tripped up on, I guarantee if you slow it down and you imagine yourself playing, it's going to be there too. It's not like you're imagining the passage perfectly or you're hearing it perfectly, but it's just these damn fingers. You've got the cart before the horse. You don't have it clear in your ear is what's going on. And then a really interesting conversation can ensue, which is, so you're telling, can I actually clear that up in my ear without playing a note? Yeah, it's possible to do that. I have done this personally. It's scary. It's a little weird because you're sitting quietly, but you're in your head, right? You're literally trying to hear things, based on your understanding. But can it be done? Absolutely. I mean, what are people doing when they're meditating, right? Are they using their imagination, or are they using their attention? Yeah. What about all those thoughts? What about all that shit flying around in their head that they're all they can think about is the Statue of Liberty for 5 minutes for some reason? Like, is that real, or are they just imagining it? I mean, it gets pretty interesting, right? When you try to quiet down, when you actually become curious about the whole process of regulating your experience, not just producing an experience. When you actually become curious about regulating an experience, you encounter some rather thorny issues, right? Which is, it's not just what you see or what you feel when you move, but your attentional resources are also really embedded in how there's a predictive loop that's taking place. The afferent and efferent, neurological feedback that's coming into from the environment, and then your interoception is part of how you feel what to do next, right? Yes, that's all incredibly rich and scientifically complex, and can I really feel that? Well, I don't know. It's not as if do I know that I'm firing neuron 3.1 or however you're gonna label them. No, but I'm willing to look maybe into that layer of my experience and find out, how do I use my attention to go there, right? Now, in terms of me self-qualifying, whether the bridge is really getting good, right? Oh, finally, we're talking about something real, not just attending to my soles of my feet or something like that. Again, it's this process of being willing to reflect and not just act that becomes a necessary component of really refining something. I mean, a very practical example is, have you ever written a paper for school, right? Okay. We all do this. We're just like, oh, I just want to get this thing done, right? And then the teacher says, haha, now I'm giving everyone their paper back and you're going to write another version of it. And everybody's like, oh my God, right? Nobody wants to edit what they wrote, right? Because they just want to have been done with it. Movement happens very much the same way for a lot of people. If you tell someone, give me 10 bridges, they're more than happy if they can to do the 10, because that means something. That quantity apparently indicates that they're able to do that. And then you're in the quantitative realm of how you value something. But, just like a good editor looks at the writing and sees, yeah, well, it makes sense to about here. And then you start talking about this and it kind of gets away from it. So what if we move this? And then the impatient you is like, oh, but this is taking so much time. And yeah, right. It's very inconvenient to edit something unless you understand, where is this going to land? Is this a job application, or is this a college essay, or is it going to be published in a newspaper or whatever? Like, your ability to imagine the impact or the audience or the effect in your life of how well you stand, that's an important part of justifying your willingness to attend in this way. Yeah. Because the layers of refinement that are possible, you don't really know how infinite it is or how much better you can get. But I mean, a good movement teacher should be able to motivate you by telling you, oh, it can get a lot worse though. You think your hand problem is bad now? Yeah, you just keep doing what you're doing. Just wait. This will seem like a picnic. Let me introduce you to this guy over here that has that's like the scene in the movie where the guy's injured and his whole life, and then he's brought into the hospital ward and the people have much worse injuries with him. Suddenly his problem takes on a different layer of importance. Yeah, these are games that we play with ourselves in terms of the time scale and context, so you can see more clearly what you have and what you're actually going to do about it. Yeah.
So I want to try and draw together some of the conversation here. Well, so we've been talking about, and I really like this piece about editing. The funny thing though, it kind of strikes me like in a certain way we've, this idea of editing, because editing is sort of like, let's back up and do it again.
Right.
That's the thing that might actually feel like is different between, my so-called movement practice versus like the referee blew the whistle and the soccer game has started. Like, I've got the ball and the defender's running at me and trying to take it away. It's like, I don't get two chances.
Right.
So it's
because that's a performative context, right?
But
that's fun. That can be really performative. Contexts are really fun.
Like you mentioned before, if I'm the kid who's been juggling the ball, all week long before the game, I might have a better shot at like redirecting the ball and going around the defender and scoring the goal. But it strikes me when you were talking about imagination and that ability to stop and not make the movement because I actually don't know yet if it's safe for me to make this movement, but I can imagine it. it's almost like a way that I can work on the editing process before. It's kind of like a reverse. I mean, no, I don't get to do it again as soon as I make the movement, but I can taste the movement. I can feel the movement. And, you know, yeah, it doesn't work for the person who's not willing to invest the attention, but the person who learns the value of that might not injure, you know, the, whatever it is. They might not re-injure the hip or the ankle or whatnot. And
that's also what the guy, you know, that it's not like the writer just produces sentences like and doesn't think, and they just, you know, a good writer, of course, they're editing in the camera. You know, they say that about filmmakers, they're editing, you know, not post in the studio, but they're actually choosing shot by shot and thinking what to do. That, of course, is taking place, right? The soccer player lining up for the penalty kick. We're talking about a great soccer player. What's he doing? What's he feeling before he kicks? Maybe it's hard to describe, but I guarantee you he's checking out, you know, what the goalie looks like, and he's also feeling whether his pelvis feels good over his feet, and how mushy is the grass, and is the ball sitting up nice, or is it down in a divot? Like, they're taking in information. It's all this composition of your resources.
Well, so this is the application of the practice in what you've been calling the performative context. And it's sort of when the rubber meets the road. And what I wanted to come back to, because we talked a little bit about—
Yeah, but I want to stop you there, though, because the rubber also has to meet the road in the practice.
Yes.
It does. It does. It's just you have to be clear about what it means at that level for the rubber to meet the road, right? And most people really confuse those two things, that when they're practicing, they're really actually in a performative mode, and they don't actually understand how to value what you're doing when you're practicing, how many dials you can turn, and how many you should turn off, so you can just stabilize this one understanding. Like, that's how you build, you know?
Right, because if I'm just gonna go to awareness through movement class, and it turns out that the program today doesn't seem to have a lot more content than a lot of flexing and extending my ankle. And I might think, all right, I did it. Like, what's the big deal? Can we move on? And the teacher says, no, we're gonna come back again to flexing and extending the ankle, but this time we're in this other position. And then when I go running and my ankle really does slide, and it really does, my heel really lifts and it pushes right up through the top of my head, then suddenly I understand what this was all about. But yeah, I have to understand that while I'm in the class, because if I just think, who cares if I can flex and extend my ankle a bunch of times? You're right, I'll miss it. But in terms of, so
that's also a problem of, you know, and again, we're talking a little more deeply now, but every student and teacher have a problem of orientation all the time. I used the word navigation before, but yeah, it's a little like Karate Kid, right? Do you ever see the movie Karate Kid?
Sure.
Yeah. So the kid's getting beat up at school. The old man, who's the super for his building, he teaches him karate, right? But he doesn't really teach him karate. He has him paint his fence, waxes his deck. He has him do all these construction projects. And of course, he's sneaking in the specifics about how to paint the fence, how to wax the car, and all this sort of stuff. There's something lovely in that dramatization of it, because Daniel, the kid, kind of doesn't know why he's being told to do this. But obviously, you know, you learn that the old man has this longer view that the kid doesn't have. That's why he's so valuable as a teacher, and their relationship is so sweet and everything. But what's happening in the moment is that Daniel, as the student, he's not oriented in what he's doing. I mean, the teacher does come around and say, look, I want you to paint it like this and like this, not just blah, 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 blah. I want you to be specific, and I want you to breathe in when you go up and out when you go down, and all this stuff. And, you know, and the hits just keep coming. He finishes one task, the teacher gives him another, and Daniel's patience eventually runs thin, because he feels like he's being abused to just build all this stuff for this guy, and he gets pissed. And the teacher then shifts in that movie. That's a lovely scene. The teacher shifts from the learning context, which the kid doesn't really recognize as the learning context, the teacher shifts and says, all right, show me paint defense. And he kind of does the motions. He says, no, 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 no. And then the teacher eventually like throws, he gives a big key eye and he throws a punch, and the kid, suddenly his reflexes have been, honed by all the labor he's been doing, right? But suddenly the teacher creates a performance context where he's got to put up what he just learned, right?
Well, that's what I hope that
that's important,
would understand about their movement practice. I mean, if we go to the end of the movie, Daniel's going to face the most merciless, like ripped dude in the ring. And, not to be a doomsday prophesier, but I kind of feel like we live in a world right now where shit's gonna, might just hit the fan when you turn around the corner, so to me, and this, but one of the things that I've added to my personal practice repertoire over the last year is experimenting with the Wim Hof method, which among other things involves getting in an ice bath. And it's something, it's not just getting in an ice bath, it's something that you said earlier. It's intentionally deciding to get in an ice bath, knowing that it's going to be freezing, but I decided it's not someone, I don't think you get the benefits of the practice if like you're like one of those NFL coaches at the Super Bowl where the guys run up and they pour the Kool-Aid over their head. Like, although maybe you would respond better if you'd been in ice baths for the last month. But the point is that, life hits you in a context where you don't necessarily get to edit. You don't necessarily get, but it's all about your preparation. And I do think, our practice is for life. And just the last word I want to get in before you respond is specifically, I think that even this stuff that might look soft and slow, like the Feldenkrais class where people are painting their feet, I think it's about resilience. I mean, maybe not for everyone, but I certainly see it for myself as part of what makes me resilient. When I'm in class, moving slowly, working with my attention, it's because I don't know what's going to happen to me when I walk out the front door. Mm-hmm. And I feel more available to, something we sometimes talk about in the context of movement, this idea of I'm ready to move in any direction at any time without preparation or hesitation. And that's, you can imagine, you say that about a basketball player, and we can all visualize what that means. But it also means like, it could mean, all right, pandemic, I'm teaching online now, and it's just like, well, I respond. And it doesn't mean that, I wouldn't prefer a different context, but the external world, the environment, which is another piece of the classroom that we're actually pretty specific about often in teaching awareness through movement. There's constant reference to your relationship to the floor or your relationship even to space. How, do you feel expanded or contracted? Just in the past couple of years, I discovered the incredible value of not just turning my head to the right, but understanding that I might have just moved towards the wall to the right of me. And that is a different thing. Maybe I'm starting to mix a few things together here. Right. But the main point was about some of these things that might just seem like, okay, those are, movement geeks talking about all the specific things. But I think it has everything to do with movement.
Yeah, I think for a lot of
resilience.
I mean, so the word performative context, right? That's a very interesting topic we'll have to revisit, but it's not meant necessarily to conjure only like a sports game or when you're going for it or when there's a lion that comes around the corner and you have to respond or whatever the way people talk about that stuff. But I mean, if you've ever been injured, right? I took a fall a few years ago, landed on my tailbone, didn't feel nice. I don't know that I broke anything. I didn't go to the doctor or the hospital, but the results of that, or the manifestation of that, hung on for a period of time. And there were days when I couldn't put my socks on standing up, or I couldn't put my pants on standing up because just bending over, it hurt so much. And okay, now putting on your pants has become a performative context. right? And if you only know one thing, that I put on my pants by getting my pants on, right? Which is the way most of us have that experience, right? And then suddenly you can't. Okay, well, how creative are you? Can you do it on your back? Can you lie on your side? Like, how are you going to actually get through this moment, right? And if for certain situations when you're really in pain, right? You're having a bad day with your back or your shoulder or whatever, but you're not at the doctor, and you're not at the physical therapist clinic, or you're not at the acupuncturist or whoever you go to see, right? And you're trying, it's got your attention, right? And you are trying to obviously move from the place you're at to a slightly better place. What are you doing? Well, you're trying to score some points at that particular moment. It's not happening at a very high velocity. You're probably moving really slowly, and you're trying to just figure out where is it safe to move, right? That also becomes not a performative context, but like at that point you need some knowledge, right? That's where your pennies in the bank with your movement practice over the last couple of years, they might actually have a little bit of a real manifestation of value then, of getting you out of that little ditch. And then, yes, maybe you will go see a competent professional or whatever you do after that. But in those moments with yourself, sometimes those are real moments too, right? And there are real moments that are very important where you're moving really slowly and you're attending very closely to what you're doing. And if you've had a lot of experience of doing that in a much safer context, that will help you be more oriented with what you're doing. I mean, how many times have I worked with clients who are having particular kinds of pain, and then you see them let me just get up, and they'll just try to get up, right? They're just going to blast through it. Like, don't do that, right? Like,
yeah, I once had a client who
let's slow down. Let's okay. Now you really need to learn something, right? But
yeah.
People, it's very interesting the way that it's clear that they're lacking some options or some choice or something, and yet they still just want to perform as if they don't need to, and that can be a dangerous situation, right? When a person is they don't know how to be properly afraid or respectful of pain, and that can be difficult.
I had a client at one point for an individual session, and he was having difficulty with his shoulder. And sometimes when we do a functional integration session, it could be lying on the back, could be lying on the belly, could be lying on the side. And I had an idea about something to do with him. Don't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea, but I thought I would sort of float it out there. I said, do you think you'd be comfortable lying on your left side? And his response was, well, that would hurt, but I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, okay, let's not lie. We're going to go with the plan B. But we had to have a conversation about why, if you already know that's going to hurt, we're not going to do it. Yes. But he was raring to go because whatever, I'm the teacher and I suggested it. So maybe there's some value there.
Right. Again, assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was really interesting. At a certain point, I remember another conversation with him. He was a real jokester. He just had a pun for everything. Sometimes getting you roll your eyes every once in a while, it actually hit gold, and it would be really, fun. And then it kind of came through that he would talk about grandkids and stuff, and you realize, like, okay, maybe the adults roll his eyes, but this guy's probably good with kids, and but at a certain point, I asked him, because he'd had difficulty for a long time. I said, you always kind of find the bright side of things. Do you think that a lot of the people that know you really well, do they understand how much pain you're dealing with? And he was like, oh no, they don't have any idea. Because this was part of his behavior. It was part of his way of, maybe out of respect for other people, well, they don't need to know about all of my trials and tribulations. Sure. And yet part of
that's part of the attentional space too. Like, yeah. That's, again, the context that person is in and what happens when they acknowledge their own pain, or they're not supposed to acknowledge it, or
well,
they.
And so what I said to him was, do you notice right now in this session, and we did some work together, and he was feeling a little more comfortable. I said, do you see at this moment, there's no need for you to make someone else laugh or someone else feel good. And, you know, it's okay. And if there is some discomfort, you don't have to hide it here. That we're actually trying to bring it to the surface, not to, you know, so that we can understand it, so that we can do something. And it was just interesting because just his way of being in the world actually was part of what potentially you needed to look at, you know, to find something better.
Well, and this is also part of, I mean, this points back to what the value of having a movement practice can be long term, right? You may not be that experienced with yourself, right? You may not be that experienced in reflecting on your own behavior, right? And that can cost you. That can really cost you. And a person with, you know, whatever, let's just say that a good movement practice or fairly disciplined and regular, that person has a few, they have an instrument panel that gives them hopefully some information, some reliable information that's maybe more than just what the people around them reflect back to them, or what the people at the office reflect, or, you know, like, in other words, they have a rich way of interpreting their own experience in a way that's useful on an ongoing basis. That's what the practice does. I mean, my musical practice with myself, I don't make a living playing music anymore. But how is that useful to me? Well, if I go and hear some music, right, the way I enjoy or don't enjoy that is often part of that. Or if I hear, you know, I hear something on the radio that I want to remember, like I catch a snippet of it, but I can't hear the whole thing. Okay, I'll know the instrumentation. I'll know what minor or major key it was in. I know something about I know something about the genre. I'm quite oriented in that, you know, for certain genres of music, I'm quite oriented in that. And so that helps me seek out that piece of positive experience for myself later. It doesn't just have to blip onto my radar screen and then I never see it again. It cannot just become a way of avoiding negative things, like avoiding pain, which of course we all do, but it's also a way of building a certain kind of authentic pleasure in your life, really allowing you to go and pursue the depths of things that really mean a lot to you, in a responsible way. And that's really the important part. You want what you're going after, or what you're crafting for yourself, you know, you want that to have a future, right? There's a particular kind of sadness when the thing that seems to mean a lot to you, your tennis game, is the thing that just, man, that's so important to you, and yet you've had 5 surgeries on the same arm in the last 7 years. Okay, how's that going? Like, what's the reflection at that point about, like, what is it about the tennis game that is that important to you? Or why can't you invest the time to understand the foundation underneath what you're trying to do with your, you know, a lot of people don't really want to learn. They just want to exert in various contexts. And injuries are one of the way that life lets you know that you might need to learn. There might be some information that you're missing, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Well, Andrew, we've covered quite a lot of ground. I think if people have listened,
is it tomorrow yet?
It's I think it's next week already. Actually, it's the same thing since it's a Sunday. But I think certainly anyone who's gotten this far might be curious about where they would find you online, the kind of offerings that you have. Could you just, you know, we can put in the caption with this video any information. But could you talk a little bit about, you know, what you're offering right now?
Sure. My business is called Body of Knowledge, and my website is bodyofknowledge.me. I work with people privately online. That's a lot of what I do, is work with private clients online. And I also teach online awareness through movement lessons. And I have been doing that for past 2 years, probably 2.5 years. And I have a subscription membership for people who want to not only to come to live classes, but to have access to a library of recordings of the lessons. Again, I did that. I really started doing that just because I wanted to reach more people, but also because, like I said, as a movement teacher, as somebody in a private practice, you're very experienced with the people that get better and the people that don't, and the certain factors that contribute to that. And the people that often get better are the ones that do have a practice and that actually do reliably do the things that you're working on together and give themselves repeated exposure to that. And so I really wanted to create a library of recordings so that the people that want that experience can have it and can have a series of lessons that are very tightly focused around a particular functional theme, or that you can really explore in depth, at least my interpretation of how to go about cleaning up that particular situation. And that's what I do.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, you've got quite a variety actually in that library at this point, from a series of lessons about understanding the function of the ribs to a whole series on the feet, or how the way we use our eyes influences our movement. A lot of rich stuff. And in your classes, I know that you always also like to leave time for those who are available to actually stick around and to discuss the experience that they're having in the class, which seems to me like just, as part of this broader conversation, I think that it's actually, for me, the time flies by to sit around and talk to about a movement practice. And I think that there is even an intellectual part of, there is an intellectual piece that's valuable too, to actually sit around and wonder, why do I go to movement practice? Oh, why do you go? Oh, that's not why that's very different. That's interesting. And, to have some exchange, maybe this could be, you could say anything you might like as final words, but one last kind of keyword that comes to mind that I think our movement practice is about, it's about relationship. So I might spend the hour in class essentially on my mat, but that performative context of life, it's also about the other people that I'm going to interact with. You might want to say something about that, but also I just want to invite you, if there's final thoughts, on everything we've talked about at this point before we wrap up.
Yeah, obviously we've been talking here, we've been talking about movement practice. We've not been doing a movement practice, right? Obviously, but I like to leave time at the end of class for people to be able to reflect on what took place in the class, also to ask questions, obviously, if anything was unclear or they had a positive experience or a negative or a confusing experience. It's important to learn how to contextualize your experience. That process of engaging the intellectual gears, the gears that say things or that talk about things or try, that's also important. Obviously, the physical realm has its own vocabulary, and yes, the more you practice there, the better, and all that good stuff. But really, one of the secrets is learning how to reflect on what you're doing and really have a clear way of mulching your experience. It's not just about do, because in the end, most people come with the hopes that X practice will solve my little problem, or maybe it'll become something more. And then if it turns out they like it, that's great. And then they're doing it for a long time. And then you really want that long time to mean something. You want it to be a context in which you actually grow as a person, not just, yes, it'd be great to become more flexible or stronger or lighter or whatever you want to do. But that's going to mean that you learn how to engage your intellectual gears too. because that's also part of your awareness. Your thinking, the way you talk about stuff, the way you describe, the kinds of questions you ask in the beginning versus the kinds of questions you ask 5 years later. They shouldn't be the same kind of questions 5 years later. If they are, you should you should maybe reflect on that. But because part of it is really, we want to get somewhere with this, don't we? Don't we? That's why we're here, right? We're not just here to have tea, right? We do want to actually make progress in our lives in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I find that to be an important part. And my final words would just be, yeah, pursue your practice to gain some level of understanding, gain some better level of understanding your life. That's a really satisfying experience. Gives you a new basis from which to act in your life.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that's a good note to end on. I don't know how long this was, but it was quite a while. We'll find out when we stop the tape. But I feel like we could keep going, and I certainly would love to do this again at some point.
Yeah, of course, man.
Where the conversation. Hopefully, we won't be asking the same questions if we do this 5 years.
That would be hilarious. That'd be hilarious if we got together and it was just like a rehash of the same topics. Hi, Andrew. Let's talk about movement practice again. Okay, what should we talk about?
Cool. Well, thanks. This was a lot of fun, man.
All right. Thank you, Seth. I appreciate it.
And thanks for everyone who tuned in. And again, just check below to find out where you can catch up with Andrew. As I mentioned, I'm planning to do more of these conversations. So love to hear, what you thought about it. Put a comment below. Anyway, there'll be more of these. This is my first one. It seemed like it came off pretty well.
Way to go.
And I think we'll sign off from here.
Okay, man.
All right.